All right, good morning, everyone. If I could ask everyone to take their seats. I would never single out a member of Congress, but since he's not seated, and it is Brad Schneider's birthday today, happy birthday, Brad. I'll be very brief. I'm Ted Deutsch. I have the privilege of being the CEO of American Jewish Committee. I'm really grateful to be at this Democratic convention. It is not my first. It is my first, however, in this new position. Very proud of the fact that AJC has conducted programs like this at both Republican and Democratic conventions for years. I was in Milwaukee a little more than a month ago. I'm thrilled to be here, and especially I'm grateful to be here with former colleagues, with diplomats, with leaders of AJC, and with friends from the broader community. I'm going to kick things off only by setting the stage to remind people of just a couple of important points. First of all, in the midst of this important, very partisan gathering at the United Center, we all know, and my former colleagues who are here and all of us understand, that standing with our ally Israel is not and can never become a partisan issue. Secondly, we need to continue to stand with Israel in its war against Hamas. The war started on October 7th when 1,200, it's important to remind people, 1,200 people were slaughtered, 251 were taken hostage. Even today, 109 hostages remain in captivity. AJC is so proud to have helped with the hostage families to help give them voice. I know that there are so many of them here in Chicago this week. It is important that we stand with Israel and that we help them in their war of self-defense, and that we continue to make the case everywhere in the world to bring the hostages home. And finally, finally, it's really important for all of us to remember that at a time of rising anti-Semitism, with the harrowing scenes that we've seen in too many places around the country, it's important for us to remember that anti-Semitism never stops with the Jews. It is important for us to stand together, as AJC does, to help secure a world where the Jewish community and Israel, democracy and strong alliances all thrive. That's why we're here. That's why we're so privileged to do this work with all of you. I'm really grateful for your attendance today. This is a wonderful program that we have in store for you. And with that, I would like to introduce Nicole Wagner, who is the president of AJC Chicago. Thanks, everyone.
Good morning. My name is Nicole Wagner, and I'm the president of AJC's Chicago Regional Board. I'm thrilled to welcome you all to our breakfast panel discussions, AJC at the Democratic National Convention. This program is on the record. I would like to remind you all that AJC is a 501c3 nonpartisan organization. AJC neither supports nor opposes candidates for elective office. If you'd like to know more about the programs AJC produced on the sidelines of the Republican National Convention last month, please visit our website, ajc.org. Our first panel, Israel and the Path to Peace. Today we are joined by Ambassador Tom Nides, former U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Halie Soifer, CEO of the JDCA, and Illinois Congressman Brad Schneider. Moderated by AJC's Chief Policy Officer, Jason Isaacson, who is also the head of AJC's recently launched Center for a New Middle East. Jason, the floor is yours.
Okay, thanks for doing this.
I think I'm going to sit here. Tom, at the end. You speak right
This is interesting. Well, you're not the judge.
Good morning, everybody. In the interest of time, I really wanted to begin by citing some passages from the Democratic platform and some passages from the Republican platform relating to the Middle East. I'll just mention very briefly that the Republican platform's Middle East language is short and to the point. It says, "We will stand with Israel and seek peace in the Middle East. We will rebuild our alliance network in the region to ensure a future of stability, peace, stability, and prosperity." And it also promises very quickly to restore peace in Europe and the Middle East. The Democratic platform is much more extensive. It's an 80-page document, a long section on the Middle East. But it says that the administration opposes settlement expansion and West Bank annexation, also opposes the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel. But it's very clear that the administration believes a strong, secure, and democratic Israel is vital to the interests of the United States. It's also quite specific about the necessity of defeating Hamas. I want to start my questioning with Halie Soifer. The question that's been on the minds of political reporters and many of us in the community, Halie, as you very well know, over the last 10 months of the war in Gaza, and it's taken on new meaning in light of the change at the top of the Democratic ticket. How can a Democratic candidate for president, in the current highly charged environment, maintain the support of the party's pro-Israel mainstream while also keeping or winning back the loyalty of the increasingly active pro-Palestinian segment of its constituency? What have we heard from Vice President Harris, for whom you worked in the Senate, that suggests that she can balance these competing policy claims?
Well, thank you, Jason. Thanks to everyone. I was told to project, and for those of you who are at the Global Forum, you know I know how to project, so I will try my best, but thanks for having me. I did have the honor of working for then Senator Harris, starting her first month in the Senate for 2 years as her national security advisor. And what I can tell you is not only does she share the views of President Biden, we know that based on the past 3.5 years and their record standing with Israel in the lead up to and of course in the aftermath of the horrific attacks of October 7th, giving an unprecedented amount of military assistance to Israel, standing with Israel not only in the aftermath of these attacks, but demanding the release of all of the hostages and continuing to stand with Israel as it faces this threat from Iran, pre-positioning military assets in the region, not once but twice in the lead up to the attacks of April 13th. But also, I can tell you from personal experience, her views on Israel didn't start from day one in the White House. I saw it from day one when she was in the Senate. She came to this role with over a decade of experience working on these issues. I traveled to Israel with her in November of 2017. This is an issue that she feels deeply in terms of the importance of the U.S.-Israel relationship, Israel's security, its right to self-defense, and she is a staunch supporter of Israel, have no doubt. I'm glad you started with the Democratic platform as well, because this also elaborates on what is the strongly pro-Israel views of our party. And make no mistake, it's not a coincidence that we have 3 pages detailing our support of Israel in our platform. It's pages 82 to 85 for those who would like to look it up. And it is no mistake that the Republican platform is empty platitudes, two bullet points that barely say anything. Because this is an issue of which our party is deeply committed. And it extends beyond Israel. It includes Israel's security in the Middle East. And our platform, which has never been stronger, I testified before the platform committee. I was very happy to say this very strong pro-Israel platform of 2020, not only should it not be diluted, it should be strengthened. Because of course we have seen the horror of October 7th. We should reflect the fact that we stand with Israel in this moment. We call for the release of the hostages. And of course, we unequivocally condemn Hamas. All of that is reflected in this platform and more, including recognition of the horrific sexual violence that was perpetrated on that day, which the vice president herself has given voice to. So in terms of questioning whether, how she can navigate this issue, she already has. And she continues to stand with Israel. I have no doubt that when she's elected in 78 days, with the strong support of the Jewish community, that she will continue to do so as president.
Thank you, Halie. Brad, I'm going to turn to you. The Republican Party platform had no specific references to Iran, but the Democratic platform went on at length about the need both to halt the regime's progress toward nuclear weapons capability and to confront Iran's and its proxies' destabilizing activities across the region. The Democrats' document also pointed to instances of the Trump administration's failure to respond to certain Iranian provocations. Unfortunately, the Democratic platform didn't mention the fact that Trump administration was responsible for taking out IRGC Quds Force Chief General Soleimani. Now, talk about how you imagine a Harris administration confronting the Iranian threats differently from the Biden administration. We have seen over the last 3 years, Iran has continued to develop its nuclear weapons capability, although it's not yet past that threshold, apparently. Its proxies are on the march across the region. We haven't really been successful in confronting Iran. Do you see a Harris administration taking a different approach?
Great question. And before I start, let me just welcome everybody to Chicago, to our great city. And those from Chicago, can you raise your hand? And I'm also going to take the personal indulgence to say it's good to be home with Chicago AJC.
Thank you. I should have said that as well.
Look, Iran is the greatest threat to Israel, to the region, but also to the United States, our interests here in the region, but also here at home. And so we need to stand up to Iran and understand Iran is a threat on many different aspects. It's not just their nuclear program. It is their support of the proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis, and more. It is their efforts to expand their reach, their influence across the region, and they do so not by building up states, but by tearing them down, creating instability across the region. Their chant is not just death to Israel, but death to America. I have no doubt that the Harris-Walz administration will stay focused and understands the importance of first ensuring that Iran never, ever gets a nuclear weapon. That has to be our #1 priority. Because imagine where we would have been on April 13th if Iran had a nuclear weapon. Or this past couple of weeks if Iran had a nuclear weapon. The second thing I think you will see is the continuation of the policy reflecting on April 13th. Iran launched 350 drones, rockets, and missiles at Israel. It was Israel, the United States, and an arrangement or alliance of other nations that defeated that attack. That sent a very clear message that we will stand up to Iran, not leaving Israel to stand alone, or the United States and Israel standing without the support of allies, but allies throughout the region. And just as important, if you look at who those allies are and what they believe in, they are countries, Arab countries, that are looking to the future. They're looking for a different dynamic in the Middle East. You mentioned that the Trump administration took out Soleimani. The Trump administration also laid the groundwork and helped establish the Abraham Accords. That is, I believe, the framework for the future that provides security and peace not just to Israel, but to the other nations in the region. And so what I believe the administration, the Harris-Walz administration, will focus on is isolating Iran, ensuring Iran can never have a nuclear weapon, thwarting Iran's effort to expand its reach through proxies and failed states, but at the same time building up and working towards a path towards peace, security, and prosperity for Israel and the region. I think that reflection of forward thinking, it's not just about Israel, it's about everything. If you were watching last night, if you were there last night, if you've been watching this campaign as it's unfolded, now it'll be 1 month tomorrow. As it unfolds, what you're seeing is a view towards a different path that gives promise and hope to a better future that is absolutely dependent on the United States leadership. And U.S. leadership on a global stage will empower and help us to ensure that Iran doesn't get that foothold on the global stage and doesn't have the ability to continue its threats to Israel in the region.
Well, let me stay on Iran for a second with you. Do you see a Harris administration trying to return to the JCPOA?
No.
Or has that been totally discredited?
One thing you'll see is the Harris administration. I had a long conversation with Ilan Goldenberg yesterday. The recognition that we are where we are. Now, we all would wish we were in a different place. 10 years ago, we were focused on getting to a place to move Iran back from the threshold of a nuclear weapon. And without relitigating the JCPOA, we moved Iran further away, a year away. Now, a year away is not eliminating Iran's capacity or capability to develop a nuclear weapon, but it is buying time. And what we should have done, I will relitigate this, we should have used that time to strengthen our position, our allies' position, to improve our prospects of moving Iran further back. Instead, what happened was the Trump administration pulled out of the JCPOA, and Iran marched forward. And where they are today is far closer to a nuclear weapon than they were 10 years ago. Where they are today are talking about days away from having enough nuclear enriched uranium, highly enriched uranium, to build not one but multiple nuclear weapons. And they just announced that they're working on developing the triggering mechanisms, the ability to convert that enriched uranium into a nuclear weapon. So the stakes are higher, the risks are higher, Iran is closer. We've got to start where we are today. And I think the new administration coming in will start at that point and look for ways to push back, to create space, and to use that space to buy time, to use that time to get us to a place where we have more security. But we can only go there is if the administration is clear, Congress is clear. It's not a partisan issue. This has to be Democrats and Republicans saying we will never allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon, and all options are available to us to ensure that Iran does not achieve their goal.
Brad, thank you. Ambassador Nides, we were talking earlier this morning about the Abraham Accords, and of course Congressman Schneider just talked about that as well. How do you see a Biden administration, a Harris administration, building on the Abraham Accords success, building on what the Biden administration has tried to do in normalizing relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel? Will that be a priority for the Harris administration? What will be the obstacles that it will face as it tries to move forward in that direction?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And let me give a little bit of shout out to Ted Deutsch. Ted, you can't leave. I see you walking back there. Because when they decided to recruit Ted Deutsch to leave the Congress to come do this, that was your biggest, happiest day. So you guys have got a great leader, and congratulate all of you for my friend. And I think someone who has a vision of what it needs to be an advocate for the Jewish community, both here in the U.S. and globally. So thank you very much for your leadership. Let me just say, there's not much things I agreed about with the Trump administration, to be clear. And when I was being confirmed as ambassador, one of the very nice members on the Republican side asked me, sir, it seems to be that the Biden administration won't even talk about the Abraham Accords. And they won't even call them the Abraham Accords. I remember seeing the Senate, because I'm a bit of a smart aleck, and I said, can I explain to you something? I love the Abraham Accords, okay? I love the Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords was, in my view then and is today, a foundational event. And as much as I believe that the Trump administration has done all sorts of other things, the Abraham Accords, in my view, has strengthened the state of Israel. So I congratulate them for doing it and supporting it as we have. So we should all applaud that. Yeah. And as we think about the future, because listen, what has happened here, even after October 7th, the Bahrainians, the Moroccans, and the Emiratis, they didn't abandon Israel. Quite the opposite. They've stuck with all of them kept their ambassadors in Israel. Most of them continue to have long, involved conversations with the prime minister about the strength of Israel. And in fact, several months ago when the Iranians were attacking Israel, those same countries were indirectly helping with the United States and with Israel to protect the state of Israel. Not directly, but indirectly, a lot of information sharing. So the foundation for the Abraham Accords should be the foundation for what comes next. And what comes next? Number one, we got to get a hostage deal. For any of you I'm leaving here to go spend some time with the hostage families. I was in Israel a couple weeks and spoke at Hostage Square. For all of us, for any of us, we should sit and pray to get these hostages out. And for those of you who know some of the families, it breaks my heart. We got to get a hostage deal. The time is now, okay? And this president and this vice president are committed to get these hostages free. So once we can get that deal done, and that means putting pressure on Netanyahu and putting pressure on Hamas. Make no mistake, this idea that this is all about Bibi, listen, I've got my issues with Bibi on occasions, but it's not only convincing Bibi to do what needs to be done, it also is pressuring Hamas through the proxies to get them to do a deal. Once there is a hostage deal, everything starts coming into place. And what does that mean? Ultimately, we're going to have a plan to rebuild Gaza. Because this fight wasn't with the Palestinian people. This fight was with Hamas. And we've got to help rebuild Gaza with a new PA, with a new group of international parties, including the Saudis and the Emirates. That's a $15 or $20 billion operation to rebuild Gaza. Yes, and we need a new PA leadership. What PA leadership looks like in the future needs to be talked about. And then we need to have a conversation about normalization with Saudi Arabia. Make no mistake, it is the single most important thing that we can do, including keeping in control of Iran, is getting a normalization with Saudi Arabia. Because it's not just Saudi Arabia, it's the rest of the Muslim world. And it's in our grasp. We can get this done. Now, obviously, it's a little dreamy, and how do you get the 67 votes? We'll let the geniuses on the Hill, including the congressman, figure that out. But I do believe there is an opportunity because Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are completely committed to this. I will say one little note. 2 years ago, when Joe Biden came for his 10th visit to Israel, I remember meeting him at the airport. And if you recall, it was the middle of COVID. It was the same time in where he decided to go to Saudi Arabia. And you remember, Joe Biden during the campaign said some fairly aggressive things about the Saudis during the Khashoggi thing and MBS. But he was convinced by a lot of people, mostly his national security advisors and his vice president, to go to Saudi Arabia. Why? Because it was good for the security of the state of Israel. He fundamentally believed that a Saudi normalization could be and should be the keys for the security of the state of Israel. So we've got to get these hostages out, we need to get a plan, and we need to get moving on a Saudi normalization as quickly as humanly possible.
Can I add?
Sure, of course.
One thing to what Tom said, just to expand on it. Abraham Accords and a plan for Gaza. After the Abraham Accords were signed, we established a bipartisan, bicameral caucus, the Abraham Accords caucus. Republicans, Democrats, representatives, and senators. This year, after the war, I've been working, we finally established a Gaza working group within the Abraham Accords caucus. To the ambassador's point, we had our first session when we sat down and talked with Ambassador Herzog, Republicans, Democrats, talking about a future for Gaza that was protective of Israel's security. And last month we had a session with the ambassadors from UAE, Bahrain, and Morocco. They are staying with us, and Congress has a critical role. You all have a critical role. I'm going to ask for your help. As you talk to your representatives or whoever you're talking to in Congress and senators, make sure they stay engaged with our caucus, because we have to, if we're going to get to 67, we have to get everyone invested now, not at a later date.
Thank you, Brad. Halie, let me come back to you. Talking more about Vice President Harris. She has expressed, and you just referenced it as well, strong support for Israel's right to defend itself. She's done that consistently through her career in the Senate as well. She's also been quite critical of certain policies of the current Israeli government. She was blunt about that when she met with Prime Minister Netanyahu last month. In what ways, if any, would you expect the Harris administration to deviate from the Biden administration's record in both its public and its private posture regarding the U.S.-Israeli relationship? Do you foresee the possibility of supporting the conditioning of U.S. aid if Washington's political concerns are not met? Is U.S. recognition of a Palestinian state even within the realm of possibility before the actual realization of a Palestinian state? People have questions.
So I will acknowledge that there are many people that are looking for distinctions between President Biden and Vice President Harris's policy as it relates to Israel, hence the question. And I'm here to tell you there's actually no daylight between them. They share the same views with regard to the U.S.-Israel relationship, with regard to U.S. military assistance to Israel. And keep in mind, this administration has now given more assistance to Israel in the past 6 months than we ever have in U.S. history in a single year. We're talking about now over $15 billion, hundreds of arms shipments since October 7th. This is all done not just by President Biden, but keep in mind, with not just the support of Vice President Harris, but with the active engagement. When Republicans in Congress delayed that $14.3 billion for 6 months, it was the vice president on the phone encouraging Congress to pass the assistance to Israel that was finally passed in April. It's the vice president who joins the president in more than 20 calls with the Israeli government, with the prime minister, with President Herzog and others, to encourage not just to make sure that it's clear just that we stand with Israel, but also now to try to encourage a deal that will ensure the release of the hostages. And yes, both President Biden and Vice President have been clear. They have been very clear that not only should the hostages get out, but aid must continue to get in, to be delivered to innocent Palestinian civilians. They understand, of course, the clear distinction between Hamas, a terrorist organization, which this administration has said repeatedly must be defeated. So there's no distinction between them, and I have no doubt that if elected president, the policies that you have seen in this administration would be continued. There would be no conditioning or cutting of U.S. military assistance to Israel. And by the way, that's also reaffirmed in our platform. Again, 3 pages dedicated to this issue, espousing the views of the Democratic Party that we not only are committed to the U.S.-Israel relationship, but we are committed to the military relationship, and that includes our commitment to military assistance.
Look, can I also jump in here 1 second? Because I spent a lot of time with her, and I spent a lot of time with her husband. You know, it's interesting. I think Biden learned something when he was vice president to Obama, to basically wanted to be included in the foreign policy discussions. Remember, when Obama became president, he wanted Joe Biden because of his foreign policy chops. I don't think I've seen a vice president involved as much as Kamala Harris has been on the foreign policy activities as she has been with President Biden. Every single meeting that Biden has had with Netanyahu, and listen, Netanyahu is not, I spent a lot of time with Netanyahu. I don't want to go on vacation with him. This is off the record, but the reality of this is, he's tough. He's tough. Biden's tough. Harris is tough. Listen, they're Jews, dealing with Jews is not simple, as we all know. And as someone who dealt with him every single day, I want Kamala Harris to be tough. I want Kamala Harris to be aggressive. I want her to support the state of Israel. I want her to do what she's doing, is getting her husband to run around the country and talk about anti-Semitism. If you think for a minute that he would be doing this without her concurrence, you're crazy, okay? She wants him to be out there visibly, and I'm assuming tonight, in his speech, he will talk about this. To be clear, he's the kind of Jew like I am. We're cultural Jews. I didn't grow up going to temple every night, not like Ted, but the rest of us who have actually grew up this way of believing this is the right thing to do, to be part of a community, that's what he is doing, Doug is doing, with the concurrence of the vice president. And so Halie and I had the opportunity to go to Pesach dinner at their house, 3 months ago, whatever it was. Yeah. I should know when it was, April. It was only like 12 of us, and it was beautiful. It was like, there you had this African-American woman, Asian woman with her Jewish husband, with the rabbi of one of the leading congregations doing the service. And thank God it was somewhat shorter than normal. But it was a phenomenal evening, sitting in the vice president's house. This is what you want. I said this yesterday on a panel. She is going to be a bridge to the future. Joe Biden has done more for the state of Israel than probably any president has done in the last 50 years, okay? The reality for us, too, as Jews, if we have any hope of getting getting back to where we need to be with the 30-year-olds, of making sure they're back like some of our kids and grandkids. She is the messenger. She's going to be able to say to these kids, you can support Israel. You can support the security of Israel. And also, by the way, it's okay to say you support the Palestinian people. Oh, it's okay. But we can do both. We can support the security of the state of Israel, no questions asked, and we can then say also, this fight is not with the Palestinian people. This fight is with Hamas and extremism. She is the voice of the future. She is the voice of We Have Hope. So not only am I pumped up that she is the nominee, but I think it's going to help us as those of us who care about the state of Israel and security of the state of Israel for the next 20 years. Her voice is going to be an important voice to move us forward.
Thank you. I'm going to ask very quick responses from each of you to the question that basically we've been kind of dancing around in time. I think you addressed it also, about the Democratic constituency, about the Democratic Party itself. Polling reveals sharp differences between Democratic and Democratic-leaning voters and Republican-leaning voters when it comes to support for Israel. In the current conflict, Pew Research polling reported in March that those in the Democratic camp were more than 3 times as likely as those in the Republican camp to say that President Biden was, quote, favoring Israel too much. And they were not quite 1/3 as likely to strongly favor the United States supplying Israel with military aid to fight Hamas. How serious is this apparent alienation from Israel among large segments of the Democratic base? And how do you see it being reversed? Brad, you want to start?
No, but I will.
Quick responses?
It's an important question. I'm going to answer it in layers. I'll start with the layer that I'm closest to, which are my colleagues in the House. And in the House, in the Democratic caucus, support for Israel remains strong and remains unified. And you look at it, Ambassador Nides mentioned, or Halie, you mentioned, it took 6 months to pass aid for Israel. It passed with 366 votes. That's an overwhelming majority that should pass easily, should fly through, and the only reason it didn't was because Republicans were putting up obstacles to that. Democrats were pushing hard to get that through. It doesn't mean everyone's on board, but we've never had everyone in either party. 25 years ago, we were dealing with Ron Paul, not Rand, the father, but we were also dealing with Cynthia McKinney. We had those extremes. We always have those, but we also have the facts on our side, and we need to continue to work to address that. We're seeing a generational shift. Folks who grew up and were adults, like Joe Biden in 1967, are going to have a different visceral reaction to threats to Israel than our kids who were born in the 90s or later, who are seeing an Israel that, for the most part, has been under the leadership of Benjamin Netanyahu and a very different messaging. But the understanding and appreciation for a strong democratic Jewish state remains very strong in the Democratic Party, and you can look at it in the polling, you can look at it in the messaging. The challenge is we have a lot of loud voices. I've had them outside my home at 2:30 in the morning. I've had them outside my office. They scream and they yell. They're calling for end of aid to Israel, but what they're really calling is for the elimination of Israel and the exclusion of the Jewish people from the American political body. They are a minority, they are wrong, and we have to call them out as such. So that, you want to ask short, so I'll stop there.
Okay, good. Halie, quick response.
So I have the honor of running an organization called the Jewish Democratic Council of America. We focus specifically on Jewish voters. So I'm going to answer this question by saying the following. There is a reason that 24 out of 26 members of the House, Jewish members of the House, are Democrats. That 9 out of 9 Jewish senators are Democrats. That 4 out of 4 of our governors are Jewish governors are Democrats. That's because there is one party that aligns with our views and our values on every single issue of importance to Jewish voters, including, of course, Israel, but also including efforts to counter the anti-Semitism that we have seen rising in our country, fueled in part by right-wing extremism, that we had a president who himself aligned with those right-wing extremists. Keep in mind, he refused to condemn white supremacy. He fueled an insurrection. But also on every other issue of importance to Jewish voters, defending our democracy, Someone on the other side says they want to be a dictator on day one. Standing with us in this fight for reproductive rights, in efforts to combat the epidemic of gun violence, every issue of importance to Jewish voters, it's the Democratic Party that stands with our community, and it will continue to be with Vice President Harris and Tim Walz.
Thank you, Halie. Tom, final response.
It's quite simple for me, right? We've just had a president in Joe Biden and a Vice President Kamala Harris that has helped us through probably the most difficult time for the Jewish people, maybe since the Holocaust. And I say that with great, as the former American ambassador, it's unfathomable to me of what's happened. October 7th, the death on October 7th, the idea that there's 200,000 Jews in the North who haven't gotten back to their homes, that we have insanity going on college campuses with kids saying the river to the sea, and they don't even know which river or the sea. The fact of the matter is, we as Jews feeling for the first time a sense of insecurity. I've never felt this. I'm a Jewish kid from Duluth, Minnesota. I didn't even know what anti-Semitism was. And for the first time in my life, I felt that. So basically, we just got to get our act together. You know, organizations like the AJC, the work that you all do, and you all being here today and caring enough about this, it's really up to us. It's up to us to motivate our voters. It's up to us to talk to our communities. It's up to us to talk to our kids, who, by the way, are not as convinced as we are. Okay? It's up to us to tell people when they stand up and say, you know, none of those protesters should be protesting. That's not true. They can protest. Just don't cross the line. We're Jews. We got to remember the importance of being Jewish, the importance of what this needs to bring back to our community. We need to be successful here. We need to get into the game, which you all are doing. That's what we need to do. And for those with those voices, we'll win in November.
Ambassador Tom Nides, Halie Soifer, we
I
are
have one
out
more
of
thing
time.
to say. It is Brad Schneider's birthday.
And happy birthday, Brad Schneider. Thank you. And that was a perfect segue to the next segment, which is going to be led by
I got to run.
Ted
Okay,
Deutsch, the CEO of AJC, who will discuss with a panel the need to address anti-Semitism in America. Ted. Thank you.